So, welcome back, everybody. We've actually seen empowerment in working through in terms of the team making good over in Halifax, Nova Scotia. So, really delighted to be joined by Ron Lovett. I met Ron in Denver in October of last year, and what he's going to talk about really goes so well with what we've been learning about this morning. And so, Ron, if it's okay, over to you. Take us through your story to start with. And what we might do is put you up on the big screen to start with, so we can see you in your full glory, and then we'll then go into you taking us through your slides.
Yeah, great. Hi, everybody. Ron Lovett, Halifax, Canadian from Halifax, Nova Scotia. Excited to be here. Thanks for having me, Neil. I appreciate you allowing me to share my story today. And I hear everyone's got a copy of Outrageous Empowerment, so I'm excited to have everyone read that as well. So look, I'm going to give you the overall story. Born and raised Halifax, Nova Scotia. I started a security business when I was 22 years old in Halifax. Really didn't know what I was going to do with my life. I was training Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu under a guy by the name of Renzo Gracie at the time that was in the UFC. I kind of thought that I would become a bodyguard. And of course they say, here's what you know, here's what you don't know, here's what you don't know that you don't know. And not knowing that there really isn't a strong market to become a full-time bodyguard in Halifax, Nova Scotia. So entered in, at the time I was doing private security by myself under Ron Lovett at nightclubs. And when I came back from a trip in Colombia, and so this is interesting because there's a UK connection here. Has anybody heard of a guy named David Courtney from the UK? Hands, anybody? Nobody? Okay. So Dave Courtney is a bit of a gangster from the UK that used to run, he used to basically rent his friends out to nightclub security companies in the UK. I was in Colombia reading this book and I thought, geez, you know, I could do the same thing, except I could be the nightclub security company. So came back to Halifax, again, started this company, Source Security, and started off in nightclub security. And then our company grew. And really my story, what I'm going to share with you is kind of this 15-year journey from starting with 2 employees to growing over 1,500 staff across Canada and being in a very challenging space. I will tell you that the security business, physical guarding space, in my opinion, is one of the toughest, challenging spaces on the planet, and maybe cleaning, just because of all the attributes that work against the industry. It's got high turnover, low wage, low morale. People don't work in our office. They work at our clients' locations. So they really deal with our clients' cultural, they're under their cultural umbrella. No room for movement, a lot of policies and procedures. It is the toilet industry, or one of that has still been in the toilet. And so my journey was really how we went back to the drawing board and pivoted from disgruntled employees and converting these folks into passionate stakeholders, people that loved to work for our company and would do anything for us. And it wasn't about compensation anymore. So that's the overview of my story. And then, of course, selling the company and having a very successful exit in an industry that doesn't allow you to exit successfully. The industry, the multiple trades, the multiples trade around 3 to 5 times. We had a very successful exit. And it wasn't because of fancy technology. It was because of our systems, processes, culture, and being had built out a national company. Neil, you want me to just get into it?
Yeah, you just get into it, my friend. You're on a roll.
Okay, beautiful. All right. So I'm going to try to move around here. If I just click, does that work?
Yeah, so I'm just going to move you to the top of the screen now so that we can see your slides and see your face as well.
All right, great.
All right.
We're good?
Yep.
Excellent. So look, the key takeaways I think that I'm hoping everyone can take away today is really the power of purpose and culture. I thought those things were fluffy when I got into this, especially being in this old military type industry. And I think very differently about that today. So I will talk about that. I'm going to talk about the unorthodox approach, on our unorthodox approach to HR operations, our flat model in a very bureaucratic and hierarchy industry. And then a few key questions that allowed me to really be successful on this journey. So off we go. I'm just going to talk, I want to start with this story because I just love it. And this is a story in our business. We not only did nightclubs and guarding services, but we did festivals and concerts. So we would do 80,000 people, Rolling Stones concert, have to come up with 350 plus guards that were making $10 an hour for a 12-hour shift, one show, one day, and then they didn't work for us anymore. So really tough on the HR. And so in this particular story, we were doing a show for Bon Jovi, and there was probably 60,000 people there. And at the time, there was a major problem. The RCMP pulled me aside and said, Ron, we have a major, major problem on the site. If you can't fix it and can't fix it quickly, Bon Jovi will not be going on. We'll cancel the entire show. This is probably 10 minutes out before Bon Jovi goes on stage. And so sure enough, I'm like, what's going on? And they point up at this fence line at the side of the show. And I'm not kidding. There's literally 1,000 men peeing on this fence. So of course I'm like, oh my God, like this is a big problem and it's weighing on my shoulders. And essentially what had happened is they didn't have enough porta potties, portable toilets, and they were put in the wrong places. Of course, that's a production issue, but we have to deal with it being security. So, I always looked at ourselves and even myself as a creative problem solver. And I love to try to solve problems differently. And so at the time I was thinking really quick, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? Because the old method is knock on everyone's shoulder, say, hey, sir, can you stop peeing? And maybe we get into a bit of a scrap and try to end it. And it can be really messy. People could get peed on. And so what we decided to do, I had an idea. We had a 6-foot high fence. And so I gathered around 20 security together and I said, look, we have a major problem. As you can see, we've got about 1,000 peers and a stream of pee coming down, and it's no good for anybody. Bon Jovi may not make it on stage. We need to solve the problem. What I think we should do is I need a volunteer of 6 guards that will follow me on a journey. We'll be nice and safe 6 feet outside the fence. So we'll be safe from the peers. But I think if we go on the outside of that fence and we mock all of those wiener sizes, I think that this will end the problem. They'll stop peeing very quickly. And sure enough, 6 female volunteers said, we would love to do that with you. We'll go right now. We will help you with that problem. And so off we went, marched up, and sure enough, the girls did a great job. And I can tell you, after just probably about 5 minutes of wiener mocking, everything was put away and everybody stopped peeing. So sure enough, the RCMP, which are our kind of a police force in Canada, Royal Nova Scotia or Royal Canadian Police Force, they came and said, like, how did you do that? Like, we didn't even see any security up there. How did you pull that off? And of course I said, we're experts and we do this all the time, and through it. So my point on this was, we were creative with how we solved problems, but it really in the long game we weren't doing anything different. I'd argue that our competitors would have solved the same problem, maybe just a little differently. And so, we had to do something a little different. So in 2011, I hit rock bottom. I was sole shareholder of my company. I lost almost $1 million. And it was because as entrepreneurs, and I'm sure you in the room have been there, it's yes, yes, yes. Well, yes, we can solve your problems. Yes, we deliver this service. And so we didn't have really a core customer strategy. And we were just saying yes to everything. And so that cost us. It almost cost me the company in 2011. And then I was at a talk. I'm involved in the Entrepreneurs Organization. I was at a talk in Toronto. And I'll never forget, there was about maybe 500, 700 entrepreneurs. And there was a speaker. And the speaker had done mystery shop programs for banks. And the mystery shoppers, before they would open an account with a teller, they would ask one final question. And that question was, why should I open an account here versus the 4 or 5 banks up and down the street? And sure enough, every teller, which was the frontline staff member, would answer that question differently at the same bank. Some would say, you should bank here because our hours are more flexible. Our customer service is the greatest. Our rates are better. We have a variety of different accounts that you can open. Not only was it different from teller to teller, it was absolutely different from the billion-dollar, multi-million-dollar marketing campaign that the senior leadership was pushing out. And so the speaker then said, so my challenge to you is speak to your frontline staff and ask them why people should do business with you. And you see how close it is to your answer. And right away, that was like a shot in between the eyes. I just knew I'm going to fail that test. And so, in true fashion, I flew back to Halifax right away, called 2 staff members into the office on a Sunday afternoon. They were security guards, had worked for my company for 5 and 6 years. And I sat them down and they were terrified, wondering what the hell I wanted on a Sunday afternoon. And I said, look, guys, I have a question. Why should people do business with my company, Source Security, the business we're working for, versus our competitors? And I can tell you that not only was their answer completely different from, me banging on boardroom tables across Canada and even outside of Canada in some cases, and the story I was selling, but they didn't know anything about the business because I could, I don't even remember what their answer was, but it was very far off from what I was saying. And then I started to ask more questions. Did they know that we were involved in the Olympics in 2010? Did they know we had offices in Toronto? They had no idea what was going on in the company. So I just knew we had very big challenges. I knew I had a lot of work to do. That was kind of my rock bottom moment, and the moment that led me to probably the first question. And the first question, which Gazelles was really helpful because I did have a Gazelles coach at the time, and helpful to kind of push me in this direction. And the first question for me was, if I had to buy my company today with my hard-earned money, if I had $1 million in my account and I bought my company, what would I do differently? And I can tell you as an entrepreneur, that's a great starter question because we are very emotionally attached to the people, our clients, our businesses, and it allows some objectivity around what you would really do. And so sometimes it's getting to those right questions. And in this case, being objective about that allowed me to really look at, what staff would we keep? What clients would we keep? What processes were we lagging? And essentially, long story short, one of the biggest things that came out of that, we probably were a $6 million company at the time. We had roughly 500 and some clients. We did an analysis of clients that were $1,000 or less per year in revenue. And I was astonished by what the data came back with. 50% of our client makeup were $1,000 or less. It made up 1% of our revenue. So we were spending 50% of our time on 1% of our revenue. And of course, as per the slide, we fired 250 clients. It just didn't make sense to keep those clients. And so that question allowed me to make that objective decision. Without the question, I would have never done that. Next, anybody in the room heard of this book, Nuts, Southwest Airlines? Either we're frozen or no one's heard of it. Nobody. Okay, great. Everyone should read this book. This was the book that, again, I will say that hearing the word culture I thought was very fluffy. And this, I don't know what year this was that I read this book. It was probably around 2012, 13, something like that. And I can tell you the one thing that made me really buy into what Herb Keller, who's a wild man CEO, had accomplished. I didn't know Southwest. They're a U.S. airline, not Canadian. I had heard about financially how well they had done, but didn't know anything about the story. So I buy the book. And of course, I'm reading this book, and it's talking about a time when Southwest was basically in a price war with Delta Airlines. Delta had dropped I think it was Delta or one of those airlines had dropped their prices, and Herb Keller was very nervous. He sent a memo to the entire company. And he said, we are at war with Delta Airlines. And if we don't do something about it, no one will have a job. We'll be out of business. And the book goes on to tell the story about the next day, they had such alignment from people that were handling the bags to pilots that everyone came to work with war paint on. And of course, I'm like, bullshit, there's no way that this happened. And so at the time I was leaving Florida, flying through New York, had never flown Southwest, and I see a young man at the counter. I've got the book behind my back. I have about a chapter left, and I don't believe it. And I go up to the young man, and I said, hey, I have a question for you. And he says, yeah? I said, do you like the company that you work for? He says, sorry, I don't understand. I said, do you like the company, Southwest? Do you like that company? He looks at me right in the eye, and he says, I don't know if you're looking for a job, but let me tell you, this is the best goddamn company to work for on the planet. And I was like, oh my God, this is unbelievable. You know, I was really taken back by that. I believed the story. And so I thought, look, I've got a lot of work to do. I have offices, I'm building offices across the country. Culturally, when I would step into my office in Vancouver, culturally, it was very different from Halifax. And that's across the country. That's a 7-hour flight. And so I knew within arm's length of me, culturally, without it being defined, I had a pretty strong culture, but there was no definition, no accountability. We didn't screen people for culture. So that set us off, and especially set me off to be obsessive about our core values. Not only do we create them, we would screen for them, onboard with them, top grade, as I'm sure you've heard of, and really live the values. And obsessive to me was not only would I write handwritten cards to guards across the country every month talking about things that I'd heard of that had aligned with our values, but on multiple occasions, I'd hear a story from someone across the country, and I would send him or her a video text message that they wouldn't expect. And it would say, hi, so-and-so. It's Ron Lovett, President, CEO. They would have heard me because they would have onboarded a video and heard me talk about our vision and values. And I'd say, look, I heard what you did last week, which really aligns with our value of teamwork. Great work. Keep it up. Love what you do. And I can tell you that might sound small, but a security guard who makes $10 an hour working a back shift in Kelowna, BC, will never leave my company when they receive a message like that. And they tell that story in the industry like it's like a tsunami hit the industry. So I became very obsessive about how I participated, and really my job became, chief cheerleader for our values, and that was very helpful to the organization. We've got lots of stories like that, which you'll read about in the book. The second question for me, because the first question really allowed us to be in a box. It allowed us to tighten things up. It didn't allow us to make any massive changes. But the second question was, what if I had to restart this entire industry? And I can tell you that was a very powerful question. Again, being objective in the process, which I look at as maybe a bit of a disruption process, but the process for us is looking at things from every stakeholder. And I think that's the key thing to going down this path. And for us, the major stakeholders is security guard. They were the major stakeholder. Without them, you don't have a business. And then we have us as the company, and we have the client. Those are the major stakeholders. And so our process was to go through that and say, what were the 3 to 5 key challenges after having conversations, not just making assumptions, from each key stakeholder's perspective, and could we create a model that would eliminate those challenges? And I'm going to pause for a sec to talk about Uber. I wrote an article on LinkedIn not that long ago after I sold my business, had spent some time in Los Angeles and rode around Uber. And I can tell you that they went through this process, but they really missed a major stakeholder. They went back to the drawing board from the client's perspective. They did not do that from the driver's perspective on all elements. They didn't. The driver experience allowed Lyft to come into the marketplace and other players. And so if you're going to go down that path, go back from every stakeholder's perspective. It's very important. And so for us, the challenges from the security guard's perspective was no autonomy, couldn't make any decisions, lots of policy procedure, no room for movement, no participation in the overall company's objectives and goals, very bureaucratic, couldn't make moves. And so what I had done is essentially our model at this point was an operations manager could oversee, say we had an operations manager in London or Halifax, it wouldn't matter. They would hire, fire, schedule, put the uniforms on, train, onboard, all the security guards, schedule in their area. And then what happens in normal fashion, they start to blow their brains out. They can't keep up. we hire a senior or junior manager below them. We eat our own margin, create more bureaucracy, and off we go, and create more challenges for the organization. We just drain it of its entrepreneurial, and nimbleness and energy. And so what I had done is really pushed all those decision-making abilities down to the site level, down to the security supervisor, who we call the coordinator. So they now, at a micro level, could hire, fire, onboard. They had they could make all the decisions of our old regional manager. And at the time, we had 14 operations managers doing those roles, 4 regional directors, and a COO. And I could tell you, I removed that entire mid-level and upper mid-level tier. They were all gone within 2.5 years. Everything was pushed down. Our site coordinators were now switched on. They were making the hiring decisions, onboarding, training. Everything was so much tighter in the company when we decentralized. And so that was a huge, huge pivot for us. Now, it didn't come without this triangle. We kind of call this the platinum triangle. And that is essentially everything we did, from onboarding, hiring, training. It didn't matter. This triangle, and this is kind of me speaking caveman business, was essential. And that means that no matter what we did, we had to cover off all 3 bases. So we had to provide every staff member the proper tools. And we had to create a very simple, I'm sure you hear this in scaling up, a simple checklist or a system around how to go through that process. And then we'd have to coach the individuals on that. If we didn't do that, anytime somebody didn't do what we had asked, they couldn't implement something, the question was, do we have the tools? Did we create a system and coach them on it? If not, 110% our fault, your fault. And once we get through there, and I think this buckles on to top grading really well. Neil, I assume most in the room know top grading or have an idea of
it.
it?
Yeah, on it right after your session.
Okay, great. Well, this may be helpful because top grading really is how well they align with your values and the objectives of the role or role outcomes. Well, I can tell you that I buckled this on a top grading because it became very clear that once that triangle was covered, once we coached someone on the systems that were created and the tools we provided, then we would see one of 3 things. A C player would go into that and could not achieve the results, because we'd also know what the outcomes had to be of this system. That's very important. Identify the outcomes and who in your organization oversees or owns this process. But C player could not achieve the results. They'd either break the tools, couldn't figure it out, need to be coached 3 times, couldn't get through the list, the simple checklist that was created. A B player, so then, as per top grading style, it would allow us to remove them within a quarter. A B player would get through it. They just use the tools, follow the system, get it done. An A player would always make it better. An A player would say, look, Ron, I appreciate that you guys think you're pretty smart up there in your boardroom and have created a 9-step checklist for onboarding. But, I think we can combine step 1 and 2 and 7 and 8. And so I think we can do this in 6 steps. And there's a better tool, by the way. I've been doing some research. There's a better tool. And so that was really eye-opening to me to say, wow, you can never get rid of those people. You can't. You can't afford to get rid of someone who moves your company forward. They tear it apart, make it better. You can't get rid of those people. And so that was very eye-opening. Unlimited vacation, once our culture was right, and I want to be clear because I think I misled people speaking last week about this. I didn't just tear this like a Band-Aid. Culturally, we moved slowly towards unlimited vacation. It started off in our office with, drawing straws with who was going to take a half day. But I can tell you, let me fast forward to where our culture got right. When we had it right, we did execute unlimited vacation, not for site level billable folks, but for anybody in the office, sales, operations, HR, anybody after the probationary of 3 months here in Canada, they received unlimited vacation. That was a tough one for me, but we were becoming results driven. And I always remember a story. My controller came to me one day because we used a program that was web-based, and we were doing the one, everyone could take a day off or work from home. And he came to me and he said, hey, I noticed the junior accountant logged out of the system today at 3 o'clock. I said, yeah, so what? And he said, well, it was supposed to work all day. She logged out at 3. And I said, well, did she have more work to do? Did she not get her work done? No, she got everything done. I said, well, why the hell do you care? And it became very apparent that we're just doing things wrong. Why are we into timestamp? If it's results driven, then let's stick to results. You can't have both. It doesn't make sense. And so unlimited vacation, when I announced that in 2014, maybe 13, it was not taken advantage by the organization. People loved it. And the reality is they probably take about 2 weeks. They have the flexibility, come when they want, go when they want. We didn't have offices anymore. And it gave at the office level the autonomy for people to just focus on results. We also threw out our policy book. I think people think that's crazy being in the security industry. But at the time I was reading a book, I believe it was Maverick, Carlos Semco, I believe his name is, a gentleman that took over his father's business in Brazil. They were in manufacturing. And he got rid of all the policies and procedures. And I believe I buckled that on with a speaker I had seen at a Vern Harnish event one time who talked about this decision-making process. And, at the time, policies and procedures to me, it was very clear that they are rules. And someone very wise once said, if, rules are for children. And if you want your employees to act like children, then create a whole bunch of rules. And that really hit home with me. Here I was trying to be against the grain and do things differently. And I can tell you that I had just hired a senior HR manager that was with a $1 billion business called Transcontinental. He had done an assessment of the company. He said, Ron, you're getting things wrong. You need to update all your policies and procedures, and we need to have everyone sign off on them. You'll never be able to scale this company unless you tighten these things up. And at the time, I was thinking of executing this decision-making process, and I said, we can't do both. You can't say, go through the decision-making process and then check the policy and procedure manual. And by the way, for us, our decision-making process was very simple. It was, if you're about to do something, is it the right thing for the customer? Is it the right thing for the company based on our purpose and values? And are you willing to be accountable? Those were the three decisions. And my theory was, if we push that out, it does two things. It gives people their brains back. It allows them to make decisions. Not that we'll agree with every decision that they make, but it holds them accountable finally for their decisions, okay? And if we don't like it, it forces us to have a coaching moment with them, which is hugely missing when you manage by policy, okay? There is no coaching. The coaching is, didn't you see the policy manual? And so we had this huge debate. I called some staff members in. There was 8 of us at the time, and I said, let's vote. We have to do one or the other. And so finance and HR, of course, thought maybe I was on some drugs and thought, this is crazy. Ron should stop reading books, going to these silly conferences. And they decided this was not a good idea. And 4 of us decided against that it was. So we were in deadlock, which was actually good because it forced me to go to the front lines and have the conversation. And that was a big lesson to me too, is how dare we plan for things and not have the conversations with those who it affects? It's pretty arrogant if you think about it. And so I called some security guards in the field. And I would say, I remember calling a young lady by the name of Sue Massot, ran a hospital for us in Ontario. I said, Sue, it's Ron Lovett, CEO. I'm about to make a massive decision for this company of whether we tear apart our policies and procedures and we go with the decision-making process, or we throw this decision-making process out and tighten up policies and procedures. I don't want to tell you where I sit. What do you think and why? Of course, at $12.35 an hour, that's a big ask for someone who you've really never met, had a few phone calls with. But again, if you think about that transition, just asking the question is also converting someone to a stakeholder, someone who's going to have a stake in the future of the company. And that person, again, would never leave my business just because I asked the question. And so she thinks long and hard, and she says, Ron, I really love this decision making because we have a lot of emergency situations here at the hospital. And what happens is people run quickly. Sometimes they don't know where the policy book is and it's not updated, and they don't know where the section is to find what they're supposed to do, and they don't use their brains. So I like this. Let's do that. I made 2 or 3 other phone calls and made my decision, came back, and we threw out the policy manual, and of course I fired the HR manager. And for me, look, that was 2 things. that was very unorthodox in the security space. And, you know, fast forward when I sold the company to Allied Universal, their $4.5 billion company, they said, look, send us your policies and procedures. And I said, no problem. I got an email set and I put a 0 in it and I just hit send. And the director of HR gets the email, says, haha, funny East Coast Canadian, but not so funny. We need everything, every manual you have. I said, this isn't a joke. We don't have any. They said, you have 1,500 staff that work in all these different locations, 24 hours. They don't come to your office and you have 0 policies and procedures? I said, 0, nothing. Now, I do want to make it clear, we did have backstop of our customers had their own policies. So at a hospital, they would have their own policies and procedures. So ours became even more confusing, but they had some of their own and we would follow those. But we did not have our own. We threw them out. And that was also back to giving people autonomy, back to the title, the subtitle of the book, giving people their brains back. This was one of the key moves. And we use it today in every business I'm involved with. I want people to make decisions. You get to know if someone is that A player. You get to understand them, and you get to, it forces a bond of coaching, which is where we need to move as leaders. So I want to talk about purpose for a sec. I mentioned this in the beginning. Again, fluffy. I wouldn't start a company without a very strong purpose today. And of course, you probably know the story. I always go back to Steve Jobs, which is the one that caught my attention. He's talking to the #1 at Pepsi, trying to recruit him. The guy finds it laughable, says, why would I work for this rinky-dinky computer company? And Steve Jobs says, well, what do you guys do? Why do you exist? And he says, I don't know. We make sugar water. And he says, he puts it back to Steve Jobs. Why do you exist? And Steve says, we exist to put a dent in the universe. That thought didn't leave his mind, and that's why he joined the company. That was a big statement. And I thought, we need something like that. And at the time, we were already doing things different from the industry. So we decided to land on a purpose of changing the industry. That became our North Star. That was big enough, and it checked all the boxes. And I have 4 things on the screen. I want to go through those because today I know the power of purpose before I didn't really believe in this. And so #1 was recruitment. Our ads, when we went to market, started with the purpose. Our purpose is to change this industry because no one wants to join a measly, crappy security company in a crappy industry. But they will join a company that's trying to change an industry. That will catch someone's attention. And people say, well, tell me more about that. And we would say, do you want to change an industry? Because that's why you're working here. It's not to work in the security industry, it's to change it. That was very powerful. Suppliers. This held me accountable to a brand new standard. I would go meet with suppliers that would say, Ron, G4S, $8 billion security company, uses this onboarding technology. And what do you think I would say when they'd sell it to me? I'd say, sorry, can't use it. Our purpose is to change the industry. Industry use it. We can't use it. It pushed me to places I would have never gone. Accountability. Staff member would build something, a system or process. I want to implement a technology, whatever it was. And I would say, does the industry currently use this? If the answer is yes, throw it out and find something better. And then lastly, the horrible elevator pitch, the one we all hate, the one that makes people glaze over. And most of us pivot to our operating model, our service, whatever it is, it's very boring. And I used to be in that same seat. And I can tell you that when we use our purpose as the elevator pitch, which I never really thought of before, but when the question came to me of what makes you different from your competition, the answer was, we are changing this industry. And the client would always say, can you tell me more? How do you do that? And that was very, very helpful. And so I think for us, the big, hairy, audacious goal was turning disgruntled employees into stakeholders. That was the one that people still thought, you can't do that. They are frontline staff that make $10 an hour. They don't care about this industry and they don't care about your company. But all of these things were moving us in the right direction. They were absolutely, we were seeing all these stories and it was really exciting. And so I'll talk about this book, Drive, really quickly, because this drove us in the right direction. And I believe Dan Pink, he talks about autonomy, mastery, purpose, and they've done studies in UK and India. And I found this very interesting. And look, the theory overall is if you pay someone a reasonable wage and that matches with their industry, but you give them autonomy, you allow them to become a master of their trade, and you give them the why, the purpose, then money's off the table and they will be totally switched on and embrace your company. But he missed something. And I heard another speaker talk about community. And for us, that was missing because no one came to our office. We had to incorporate community to really finish that off. And when we finished that off, we created micro teams. For us, community was security guards joining their own micro teams and allowed them to coach each other and facilitate experience, share, problem solve at a micro level. And that was really awesome. We can talk a little more about that later. So I'll talk about Ashwani because that's kind of what got me here. And Neil, does everyone know the story? Would you like me to go through these stories really quickly?
I think we showed it at the session we had 3 months ago. So most folk have seen it. Just give a quick overview of that.
Yeah, look, the overview of this, I can tell you the overview of this story is you see Ashwani joining the company as what I will say is a disgruntled employee. And then you see the first move when we allow him to go buy the truck. That's the first step. I would say then he gets a little more engaged and he has some skin in the game. He's got, he feels that he's part of something. And then as we move on, as he learns that he can make his own decisions with a decision-making process, that we don't have policies and procedures, as all these things started to come into play, then he makes the move into being a passionate stakeholder. And that's when I get into this India story, which really blew me away. I couldn't get my old COO to do that type of work. And that work, when I say that, I mean, Ashwani went out of his own way. I paid him this much money to go do the research on how to expand our company to India. Very interesting to me. You just look at that and think, wow, he makes $13 an hour, whatever his pay was, and he's now thinking strategically about my company. That's where my company was moving. And I can tell you that if you can have your staff, not just firefighting, not just doing their regular job, but thinking strategically at all levels of your organization, you move, you're gone. Your competitors cannot catch you. And so that was the big message around this Ashwani thing. And that's why I told that story in Denver. It was just his journey. How do I go back? Oopsie. I'm trying to go back here. How do I go back? Oh, sorry. I got it. So I don't know how to use any of this stuff. So the next story, which is interesting, but we were seeing this happen all the time. And there was a guy named Paul. He worked in the South Shore at a post-secondary education facility, and we had a guard not show up. It was his birthday, and he decided to kind of cancel his own birthday party to go in and join the team and work at a shift. And so I was on a flight, and I was texting this frontline staff member. I had access to everybody. And I said, Paul, I just want to thank you for doing that. That means a lot to me. And his reply says, no problem. This is my company, my family. And I tell you, that hit me like a ton of bricks. I was like, oh my God. And in Nova Scotia, he was making less. I'm like probably $10.35 an hour to say my company, my family, not a shareholder. He was a passionate stakeholder. And of course, I've got ADHD, I'm dyslexic, and autocorrect and myself don't get along all that well. And so I'm flying out of Halifax to get to Toronto, and I cut and paste this message, put in my own message about how proud I am, and I'm just trying to get this off. I'm going to send it to 1,000 staff members before the plane takes off and I lose service connectivity. And sure enough, I get it off, and I'm proud of myself. I shut the phone down, phone dies. I fly back to Halifax that evening. I walk in the door, and my wife's got a really dark look on her face, and she says, you need to sit down. And I said, what's going on? She said, you made a really big mistake today. And I'm like, oh my God, what have I done? What have I done? I said, well, what happened? She said, the email. You sent an email to every one of your staff members. And my assistant had forwarded her the email. And I said, yeah, well, what's wrong? She said, honey, you need to proofread your emails before you send them. You cannot send emails without proofreading them. I said, well, what do you mean? I said, I proofread that email twice. And so this is the actual email. It says, hey guys, want to share a powerful text I just received from Paul, who stepped up today on his birthday to cover off a shift at another campus on his day off. After thanking Paul for his help, he replied with, no problem, this is my company, my family. And I wrote, very proud that we have Suck, Dedicated, and Patio, our people, spoken like a true stakeholder. And of course, I spelled stakeholder like an idiot holding a steak. So I was told, I guess I'm not supposed to write emails and do things like that anymore. And I don't really touch anything anymore for everyone's safety. So next, I want to, we're getting to the end, but I want to talk about this because this to me was a little, I'll call it revolutionary in HR. And this came about with, you can hear me okay, Neil?
Yeah, I'm just going to move you over so we can actually see the whole
Perfect
map.
I'm going to give you the background. The background of the story was, again, if you can visualize, our culture was right. We screened for our values, told people about our purpose. We were doing all the things we were told were going to make things work. We had read about it was working. We had passionate stakeholders. And then I had a problem. The problem was my accountant called me and said, we have an A player. Her name is Carolyn. She works in the accounting department. She's looking for a job. Now, of course, I'm having one of these moments like, was this all for nothing? No one's supposed to go looking for a job. We pay the reasonable amount. We do all the drive things. They're passionate stakeholders. Is this all a waste of time? And so I go directly to the source. I meet Carolyn for a coffee, and I ask her what's going on. And she said, Ron, I love the company. I love our purpose. I love the values. I love the team, but I don't love what I do. And so the theory of, I think two things were very obvious to me. One, the job description that we give everybody. There's no way that people love 100% of that job description. They're lucky. They are lucky to be aligned with 60% of it. And the old saying, to a degree I believe it, but you need the right people in the right seats. Well, that's talking about delegation. And this made me question delegation versus task alignment. That's a little different. It's a little different for me to say, hey, so-and-so, I'm tasking you to do this, and you seem to be okay. That's great. Versus, what do you love to do, and let's make sure we task you with that. All we did is make that small correction. And so what you're seeing here is that conversation continues. I said, Carolyn, what would you like to do? She said, look, I would like to do things in training. I can do the accounting, but I don't love it. And so right away we said, we have a gap in that. Let's connect you. And so what we did is, I call this, and we created task mapping, where we go through all the tasks, and then the primary responsibility, the primary contact who's primarily responsible had to put their name down. Who else was a secondary contact, knew how to do it, and was able to complete the function, had to put their name down in that second column you see, and then who wanted to learn about it. And look, this was the first one we created, and right away, misaligned tasks. And as you can see in the top bracket, like processing T4s, you had this person that hated doing it, but the secondary person enjoyed it, but it wasn't their function. So right away, we started to have people, our marching orders were, if you have a function you don't like, after we go through this process, give it to the person who knows how to do it, switch seats with them. And so we started to realign. We started at the office level, and then we went outside into the organization. It's very unorthodox to think, well, a security guard that's an accountant from India that presses a button on a security site can reconcile our books. And the key thing for us was everything that was done with frontline employees was outcome-based, i.e. you reconcile the books and they're done properly, overseen by the accountant. The outcome of this is X. Here's how we measure it. And we pay you $150. For a security guard, that was great. And so we would start what we called insourcing, because the company was called Source Security, all these different tasks. And you blink your eyes, and all of a sudden, within 6 to 9 months, people at the office level were solely focused on things they loved. And they had shed away things they didn't love out into the field, out into different employees, frontline staff members, which got them more engaged. And I can tell you that it allowed us to have task alignment, because what I know today is if you're culturally aligned, you're only halfway there. If you're task aligned, you really get your organization aligned properly. And so that's what we had done. And now our company, Conley Owens, does that for our customers, and it allows customers to scale without adding those layers once we go through this task mapping process. It's awesome, and it worked incredibly well for us. And if we couldn't find someone internally, then we would outsource that single task. You know, think how easy it is to outsource things from admin to different things. We'd outsource that single task, and whoever had the responsibility of the task they didn't like it, it was up to them to negotiate with an outsourced contractor. This really changed our business. So there was love it or hate it. There's no, I think it's okay. Are you excited to get up in the morning and do it? If not, it's labeled in red and you need to move away from that task. And look, there's no doubt that we had some people that just didn't align with any of their tasks and we had to part ways. But it was better for them too. They were working for a company they loved, doing things they didn't love. Death by a thousand cuts. That was a big lesson for me. And it also helped, as you can see, our growth. 2015 is the big win year. When all this stuff was humming, we grew 60%. 60%. And of course, the last question that hit me at that time, and we were very flat. So I guess just to put this into perspective, at $4 to $5 million, we had 14 mid-level managers, 4 regionals, and a COO. At 10 million, we were 7, and we had about, I guess back then too, probably about 12 people at head office level. When the company was getting ready for sale in 2015, we had the security guards. We had 51 to 8, I can't remember the exact number, people focused on tasks, from doing our newsletter to things that were all outcome-based. We didn't pay overtime. Everything was outcome-based. So we had about 51 people, and then we had 7 people running the company, including 2 salespeople. That was it. It was really HR and accounting and sales. That was it. We were lean and mean. And so what it also allowed us to do, from a client's perspective, because forever people told me, don't compete on price, don't compete on price. I'm in a commodity space. And so there was very few, yes, you know, if we were doing the security for Jay-Z for his tour, Justin Bieber, it wasn't about price. But for the mass industry, the security guarding, the tender, the RFP, it was price. And so we were looking for that Southwest Airlines model of best service meets best price. You do that, you become disruptive. Look at Uber. You know, you absolutely disrupt. And so that's where that 60% growth came from, because not only was our service better because our bureaucracy was gone. If a client had an issue, they dealt with the frontline site level manager, but it also allowed us, after gutting all that mid-level management, it allowed us to pay site-level individuals more and contain a higher margin. Not site-level margin, but overall EBITDA increased because we didn't have the back end anymore. We shut offices down. We got cars off the road. You'll read more about it in the story, but we were able to increase our overall profitability, even though we lost a little bit at the site versus what our competitors were making for margin, and then their margin would be eaten up by the back end. So at 2015, going into 2016, and we were 10 million at the time, I asked myself a very powerful question, the third and final question: would I be excited to reinvest in my industry? It was tough to get to that question. That's an objective question. Loved what we were doing, but didn't love the industry. Didn't necessarily love my clients. And so the answer to that was no. I wouldn't reinvest in my industry. If someone approached me and I wasn't in the industry and they said, would you write a check and come on this journey with me? I'd say, sorry, too many things I don't like about the industry. So I decided to exit. We approached 5 companies. I led the charge myself, and we were acquired by the largest company in North America, $4.5 billion company called Allied Universal. And we exited for a 24 times multiple. And that's the big end of this story, which we're really proud of. And the process of when the acquirers were shortlisted, from my perspective, they'd come down, I'd show them our dog and pony show, all our systems, processes, onboarding, everything that we had done, all the things that we were talking about here, but we got down to the micro details. And then they would go to the site and ask the security guards to tell them about all their experience and everything. And essentially, they told the exact same story as me, showed all the same systems and processes, but from their side. And the companies couldn't believe it. They thought, holy shit, how did you do this? How did you get that type of alignment to the front lines? And they paid us for that. And so we had also kind of reached our BHAG, big, hairy, audacious goal. We had frontliners that were passionate stakeholders. And so our company, Conley Owens, today now does that for our clients. We help them screen, onboard, and really help them with programs that take those board level objectives and really push them into the front lines. So we wrote a book, Outrageous Empowerment, which you all have. I'm excited to have you read that story. And just quickly, I'll finish things off. I've got 2 kids now. And so this is my daughter. She's actually 2.5. And so she was born a month before I sold my company in 2016. And so sure enough, she's born in the hospital. I'm sleeping in the hospital with my wife, who asked me to go and register her name in the computer system. I say, no problem. Of course, she's read some of my emails. She stops me and says, Ron, spell the name for me. And I say, no, I'm not that stupid. Georgia James Lovett. James after my grandfather, James Conley. And so I go and I register at first, middle, last name. I'm a little tired at the time, but it says other. And I thought maybe this is a space for a fun nickname. So I write in little G, just thinking it's, I've been calling her little G. My wife had been calling her little G too. So sure enough, fast forward 3 months later, we get her health card in the mail, and it says, my wife grabs it and comes to see me in the living room, says, we have a problem here. Georgia's health card says Georgia J.L. Lovett, and I don't understand why there's an L. And I was like, L.L. I'm like, oh my God, the little G is in her name. This is not good. So of course, as a good husband that I am, I completely denied it. And then she walked away confused, and then came back to me a little later because she had saw a small smirk on the corner of my mouth, and my eye twinkled a bit. And she said, I think you know something here. And I said, well, now that I've thought more about it, I did. When I registered the name, I did Georgia James Lovett, and there was a spot for other, and I wrote in little G. And she says, you're telling me our daughter's legal name is Georgia James little G F and Lovett? And I said, unfortunately, right now it is. And so you'll see there, I don't know if it shows. That's her legal name. Of course, we had to legally pay $150 to change it. My wife had me sign a letter that said, Natalie Owens, Georgia James' mother, would like for her legal name to show as Georgia James Lovett. Please remove all other names that my idiot husband added in his drunken or tired stupor at the hospital. So look, that's it. That was kind of the journey. And so now I'm involved in a few different businesses, one being real estate, one being frontline engagement, and a CFO for hire practice.
Perfect. Do you want to just knock off your slide share for a second, right? And then we'll just open this up for a few questions. If anyone's got any questions.
Sure.
Who's got a question they'd like to start with?
Yeah, fire away.
Do you want to go to the front, and then one can see you can then
Come on up to the hot seat.
There you go.
Thanks very much, Ron. When you're removing those middle management positions, did that create a lot of chaos within the company?
Yeah, look, that's a really good question. It was, knowing what I know now, I was doing it in piecemeal. I really had a blindfold on. And so typically what would drive that is if I couldn't convert someone to become a coach that wouldn't let go of their old, firefighting habits, then I would move them out. And then others could see writing on the wall. I don't know if there was an absolute right or wrong way to do it, but, knowing what I know today, I probably would have set things up and then just done it the one time. They always say cut once, cut deep, cut fast. Although I don't know, I guess in hindsight, people seeing that gave them an opportunity because we were very transparent. It would be like, hey, Bobby, you don't seem to be aligned with where this company's going, and there's no right or wrong, but I've got the keys. And if I can't convert you to a coach that is going to coach people on these systems processes, you don't add value. And you should go work for someone else. And I think another thing that I just had a thought of that I think is important to talk about is in our space, lots of labor claims, okay? And in the last 5 years that I owned the company, we had 0 labor claims, as in no one took us to the labor board. It was also something that the company who acquired us could not believe that we had 0 claims. They thought we were hiding information because even that decision-making process, even our values, but allowed people to be accountable so much that if they made a decision and it was a manager or frontline staff and they'd say, I thought it was, so a security guard fell asleep reading a book, I'd say, look, that wasn't the right thing for the client, wasn't the right thing based on our purpose and values, but you are willing, you have to be accountable for that. They would leave on their own accord. We never were taken to the labor board. Sorry, a little pivot there. But so back to your question, some people did get nervous. They just didn't agree with where I was heading because it was very unorthodox and still is today. I still have people that say, I don't agree with how you run things, but I can tell you that all 3 of my businesses today run like that. I would never go back. And we're really proud of that, and we see incredible results. And so it's easier to do that today and not add than to tear down. But yeah, we had removed layer by layer, and essentially it was that old, I think we all have firefighting managers that think that they are so important to our business that if they're removed, the business can't succeed. And the reality is they go and nothing changes. You actually get to understand different portions of your business. They had jumped on a few grenades. You'll get to fix your company very quickly. And so that was very helpful to us to remove those, but have conversations up front, i.e. from a top grading perspective, you can't get there in 3 months. Let's agree up front that let's part ways. So we don't write checks. Let's just agree to that. And they would, especially being results driven too. Sometimes that switched to results driven. If the results was them to be coaches and facilitate systems or process, they couldn't get there. So they eliminated themselves.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, Ron. I did see you in Denver a few months ago, but I've got two questions actually. One is, what are you up to now? And the other one, if you are willing to share why you didn't like the industry.
Sure. So what am I up to now and why I didn't like the industry, correct?
Yes.
So I'll start with why I didn't like the industry because that's an easy one. I wasn't learning from my customers. I wasn't learning, and I also didn't like to be in a commoditized industry. I didn't like that it was really tough to show value and make more money and being in the box of tenders and RFPs. I don't like that. I didn't have the relationships with the right people. And so if I was being honest with myself, I just didn't enjoy the industry. The only good attribute is cash flow, 3-5 year contracts, but horrible margins, just horrible margins. And so that question of would I reinvest was the best one to get me out of there. Does that answer that part of your question? And then what am I up to now? So Conley Owens, which you saw on your screen, again, that's why I wrote the book. The book is really, to me, is a marketing tool to help us grow that business. We're looking for Fortune 1000s. And interesting enough, I will say, I believe in throwing lots of Hail Marys. And so part of me growing this business, so we could get in touch with companies like your Walmarts that have massive amounts of frontline staff. RBI is a client of ours, Restaurant Brands International. We're into some challenging spaces today. We just put an advisory board together. And if sure enough, on that board is actually Vern Harnish, head of HR for Starbucks, Zappos, Southwest Airlines, and ex-HR director of Pepsi globally. So we've really, we will throw Hail Marys and be very strategic about how we grow this business. We're pretty proud of that because we tapped into the companies that influenced our growth. And so that company does, our purpose today is our old BHAG. Our purpose is to convert our clients' frontline staff into passionate stakeholders. And we're doing that. We're doing an excellent job. The other company I'm involved with is called Vita Living because to me, the security industry was a toilet. And so I got into the affordable housing sector. I think it's a hot topic globally. I think it's a major need. There's so much new development. And so, back to what I talked about, I bought a 12-unit apartment, very rough neighborhood 3 years ago when I was still in the security space and went through that process instead of rough and tough, Ron Lovett, security guy, pay me the money or I'll throw you out. Went back to the process of disruption, key stakeholders, what are their challenges? And the key stakeholders being the tenants. 4 challenges being safe, secure housing that's clean, provides sense of community and opportunity. So I created Vita Living after some piloting, testing, and we are obsessed about those 4 things. We now have just under 300 units, looking to grow to 10,000. Very different methodology on how we operate in the space. So very similar to what I've talked about, we have no mid-level management. It's all done at the ground level. We have live-in superintendents. We call them building ambassadors. Our purpose is to revolutionize the industry. And so everything is different. We tap into tenant skills. We screen them for how well they align with those 4 pillars. It's a very different methodology that allows us to charge a bit of a higher price point, operate cheaper, bit disruptive, and add a ton of value to people looking for affordable housing. So it's called Vida, V-I-D-A, which is the word for lifetime in Spanish, But if you check out vitaliving.ca, you'll see some stuff, or check us out on YouTube. A lot of interesting videos and a very strong brand. And the plan is to build this to 10,000 units in 5 years.
Excellent. Ron, it's top of the hour. 3 o'clock here in the UK. I don't know what time it is in Halifax, Nova Scotia, but
4 a.m. I'm going to the bar.
what time?
No, it's like 10 o'clock. It's okay.
This has been fabulous. Again, I just positioned it with the guys beforehand that we were at Beck & Call Technologies. It's the only second time I've done this. I did the first one we've done 3 months ago. But it's been amazing, the energy you brought to this afternoon's presentation, certainly in terms of just after our lunch. We were still digesting a sort of lovely lunch. So again, just everyone in the spirit of recognition and Ron's coaching. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks so much, everybody. Enjoy, and thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. We're going to have a quick
Appreciate
break, 10 minutes, and then
Okay.
I want to talk about top grading.
Yeah, excellent. Good luck. It's a great tool.
Take
Ciao.
care. Have a great day.